Okay, if everybody will be seated, we'll get started. We don't want to hold up the staff here at the JCC, as we've been known to do in the past, beyond the time that we've reserved the room. I want to thank certainly the JCC for hosting us, and thank you for coming out on a, well, sort of a typical Michigan spring day. And of course, I'd like to thank our speaker, Mark Grebner, who you're going to have a good time. I swear to God, you're in for a treat. Mark tells the truth as he sees it, and he has an absolute lust for disregarding conventional wisdom. I don't think anything gives him more pleasure than that. But he has the right to do so because he's been in the political game for a long time now, and he's come up with some really creative concepts that have proven out in fact. I'm going to let him tell you a little bit more about his background, and he'll take it from there regardless of what I do. So it's too bad we don't have seat belts on your chairs, because this might be a bumpy ride. Mark, come on up.
Okay. Maybe I should tell you something about myself, or at least some convenient lies. Larry Kestenbaum knows me from 47 years ago. 47, when he was 15?
Well, 73, right?
No, the Morris Udall sign in your window.
76.
But you had it up 3 years before the election.
Not for that many years. No,
Okay.
Neil Brown is 73.
That's true, 73, okay. All right, so anyway, let's just say I've been involved in politics for a long time, and my life is politics. I was a student at MSU I was an undergraduate there for 11 years. I set many records, which are all memorialized by the university in the form of regulations prohibiting people from doing all the things that I did. I, to this day, run into people on the campus who say, "Are you the Mark Grebner, the one the rule was named for?" This is, in particular, that the scholarship I won cannot be renewed that many years. It can only be used for 5 years, and then you're out. After that, so I ran for county commissioner, lost, ran for county commissioner, won when I was 23 years old. Have been a county commissioner more or less continuously now. I'm now 66. I have promised to step down and not run again in see, that's how bad it is. In the year 2036, I'm not running again. That one I will be 85 or something. At the time I leave office. I am regarded by almost everyone in Ingham County with irritation and maybe a little concern and maybe just, I hope, a touch of dread. There, I've kind of run through that. Okay, so I've been a political consultant, it seems like my whole life, but I became a political consultant because I fell in with a campaign for state representative for Lynn John Dahl in 1972, and not knowing anybody, at this point I'm only 19 years old, I assumed that this was like a slice of the whole world, that the whole world was like the John Dahl campaign, that all campaigns were run this way. And so the John Dahl campaign had something like 15 standing committees because they had a slogan that, this is a state rep campaign, right? They had a slogan that you couldn't really participate in democracy if the campaign itself were not a democracy, if we didn't do things democratically within the campaign. And so I was just trying to put together a campaign on the campus at MSU. We had like 45 days to go before the election. The students were already arriving. We needed to register them to vote. We needed to get the campaign literature. Nothing was ready. And so I tried to get a piece of campaign literature for this, and I was told that this first step was had to be researched through the research committee and had to be sent then to the voter contact committee, which would plan it, and then something about some other committee which would print it, and then the finance committee which would finance it, and the coordinating committee which would synthesized the 4 other committees, all of which were actual committees. They weren't just the chair like issuing orders, they were like committees that met. And so the meeting schedules for all these people had to be coordinated so we could get decisions. I kept saying, no, it's September 4th already, okay? The election is whatever it was, November 5th. So I guess that gave us 60 days at that point. No, we have to actually like get something to the printer like 3 days from now. No. So anyway, we eventually stumbled through that campaign, but that was the point at which I became a private consultant because I decided I was never going to go to another meeting like this. And so I would just tell people what they should do, and if they didn't want to do it, that was okay. Because I'm just a consultant, you know, all I did was offer advice and I could leave. Then I discovered, of course, the John Bell campaign was as typical of politics in America as the summit of what is called Mount Everest is of the Earth's surface, which is to say that there are other places that have snow, but really nothing quite like that. So anyway, having been blighted by that experience, I have simply refused to be an interior part of any campaign since then, and I just go and make up my own rules and tell people what to do, and then people invite me sometimes to give talks like this. So that's all you get to know about me. Okay. God, I should tell you a couple of my best jokes, though. I hate to ruin this. So these are truths, right? Call me on any of these and like bet me something, and I'll take your money from you. So I have a lawn sign now because I've been on the board for more or less continuously for 42 or 44 years or something like that. And so my lawn sign says, Grebner, we can't get rid of him. And I have a famous bumper sticker which is out of print now, but I keep thinking about reprinting it. It just says, Grebner, no worse than the rest. Which I've actually used in '74 and is not a reference to anything remotely contemporary. Okay, so now I'll actually try to talk a little bit about GOTV and politics and technical campaigning and stuff like that. My world is really what I call technical politics. I don't do media, I don't do themes, I don't try to understand voters, you know. I just try to figure out how to kind of manipulate things and people. And so the first thing I want to raise with you, see, because my general thesis is that everybody I'm talking to is completely wrong. And so that applies to you, okay? I'm just assuming that all of you are just totally wrong. And my goal is to prove that to you, maybe humiliate you. So that's okay. As I said, I'm regarded by everybody back in Lansing with not really contempt, really just irritation. I think it's my sweet spot. So I want to describe 2 ways to organize human activities, like they're polar cases. On the one hand, we have what we could call an enterprise. An enterprise takes inputs and there are outputs, and in between you've got some set of activities which convert the inputs into outputs. And then you can optimize the enterprise. Now, I'm being abstract, but let's be kind of concrete about it. If this were, you know, like a convenience store, you have like product you buy, and you got employees, and you got customers, and you got location, and you're trying to sell as much stuff as you can and make as much money out of it. And if you can change the number of hours people work, or how much you pay for stuff, or what hours you're open, you can manipulate, you can change the technology involved and do a better job of converting this to that. And you might think that GOTV is like that, right? You got inputs, you got outputs, you're trying to create more votes.
Tell people what GOTV is. I'm sorry,
I assume that I'm talking to technical people here. Get out the vote, okay? I'm sorry. Good. It's good to. Yeah. I assume that you've all. I mean, okay. Okay. So. Okay. You got this idea of an enterprise. An enterprise can be lots of different things. It can be an army. It can be a commercial venture. It can just be anything. And then there's a completely different way of organizing things. Polar case, which we could call a ceremony. And a ceremony is judged by how well it follows past practices, the rules it observes, how people feel about it, how people remember it, whether it is an outstanding example of itself, right? So you could think of like a funeral is a ceremony. You can't optimize a funeral, right? Go ahead and try sometime. Try to get people to get in and out of the funeral home faster to cut the rent on the place, or work on, can't we cut the price of the casket if we had like a plastic. Really, you're going to get dealt out of the world of funeral consulting very quickly if you try to do that, right? So here you got like what I would call ceremony, and here you got enterprise, and there are some things that are in between, and I could name some, but there's a continuum, but they're pretty clear polar cases. Now, I assume that a lot of you have been involved in campaign activities. Maybe Chuck is warning me that I'm making this assumption, but I'll bet you have been. So I want you each to think about the most recent activity, or the one you remember best, the get out the vote work that you've done. Participated in, helped design, or just were a foot soldier for it. And I want you to each think, was this more like a ceremony or more like an enterprise? Was it more about carrying out the traditions and honoring the wisdom of the people who ran it? Or was it more like running a 7-Eleven and trying to make more money for the owner, okay? And I want you to each kind of like think, now those are polar cases, maybe your actual experience was mixed, but just decide in your own mind how close you were. I mean, pick one of those, like become binary here. Choose one or the other as being most like what you did. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you, those of you who think that the get out the vote drive you were involved in most recently was an enterprise, raise your hand. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, and those of you for whom it was a ceremony, raise your hand. God, it's about equal. I thought it'd be like 20 to nothing. Okay. Well, in that case, you people have been involved in much better organized activities than I ever saw in my life. Boy, it's just, I've never seen one that looked like an enterprise to me. Okay, well, God, maybe Ann Arbor is like a different place. Okay. The point I would make it, so I'm trying to make this point, but you've now stepped on it, which serves me right. The point I'm trying to make is most get out the vote drives are an opportunity to share emotions and discuss ideas and to convey thoughts and to do ritualistic activities, but they don't have nothing to do with actually turning out voters. Okay? If you've been involved in some that were actually tuned, that people were trying to optimize, you are, you've been very lucky. Okay, now I'm going to ask you 2 more questions. Think about the marginal cost of a voter, when I say a voter, of turning out an additional voter in the year 2020. The Democratic Party and its operations and the things technically not part of the Democratic Party, but which are really part of the Democratic Party, and all the things you're doing and all the things everybody else is doing. We're going to be spending money, and we're going to be spending time, but time can be converted to money by some formula. It doesn't really matter what it is. Let's say that an hour of volunteer time is $10. It doesn't really matter precisely. But just imagine that by the end, in 2020, on November, our goal is to increase, we're trying to make this an actual enterprise. So imagine nationally it's an enterprise. And it sort of is a little bit for the Democratic National Committee. So how much money does it cost at the margin, the most expensive vote they buy deliberately? By buy, I really just mean that their activities cause an additional person to turn out. How much do you think it costs to get one additional voter to vote? Okay. And I won't, maybe I could ask you, but there's really no point. Go ahead.
What are you counting as the cost?
I'm talking about cash money like contributions, and I'm converting volunteer time into money at a rate of, let's say, 10 an hour, but it could be 15 or 20. It's not sensitive.
There's all the overhead. There's the office. There's all the material that you use.
Advertising.
Yeah.
Right. These are. But where you have a choice of doing or not spending or not spending the money, you set up a program and you mail out 1 million postcards using my text that's quoted in Gerber and Green in the book Get Out the Vote. Okay, the text we used in 2006. And for some stupid reason, you go to the index and you read in the appendix and you copy slavishly the research instrument we used in 2006 in our Get Out the Vote drive, which to this day it shows up in my mailbox. And I think, oh my God, why don't you spell it correctly? Why don't you rewrite it? I didn't. Anyway, so you put out 1 million postcards the way the DNC keeps doing, or 10 million, or 20 million, right? Or you don't. And you put out those 20 million pieces, and it causes some additional number of people to vote. You mobilize a bunch of voters, you send them out with these lists, do this, and you decide to do that instead of doing something else. And the question is, how much do you spend? In the end, when you're trying to optimize an enterprise, you try to find the next cheapest place to get a vote, and that's where you put your effort. Okay. So I'm going to make a wild ass guess here. I'm going to guess that you people think, because you always hear about these techniques. Oh, we can do this. We're going to use text this year. We're going to station people and we're going to hold signs. We're going to remind people it's election day. We're going to put up banners. We're going to, I don't know what. Okay, we're going to send out these postcards that remind people that people just like them are voting. Okay, so all of these techniques that you hear about, you assume those are like marginal techniques, and they are the ones that are used at the edge that typify the process of getting more people to vote. Okay, so I'll just assert this, and we'll like do an over/under, maybe that way. So this is like audience participation. What if you think that it costs $50 to get an additional person to vote? Okay. Or now, so those of, I see somebody shaking his head no, which is good, but I don't know if it's higher or lower. So do you think it's more? It's less than 50. He says, I'm sorry. He says it's more.
$1,000.
Okay, so let's start with 50 and ask the people, so what do you think the marginal cost is? Is it more than $50 to get one additional Democratic vote, or less than $50?
More.
God, you're ruining my talk. Yeah, go ahead.
If you have volunteers, it's a little less.
What do you think the price is? What do you think the cost is with volunteers?
Well, it depends. If you have...
Marginal. Remember, you've done the easy ones. The next one that you buy.
Okay.
The answer is, my guess.
I take it back.
Okay, my guess is it's at least $1,000. Okay? In other words, 100 hours of somebody's time to get one vote, right? To get one vote is 100 hours of a volunteer's time. And that would be well spent. Okay? And instead, we hear all this crapola about mail out these postcards, phone calls. So a whole bunch of you are going to get rounded up and made to call people who've already been called 300 times because of the only phone numbers that are available. And so the people stop answering the phone, and you know this because you get the same calls yourself while you're there at the phone bank because they're all trying to call you because the only phone numbers we have are these same phone numbers. Go ahead.
Are you talking about an average case like the corrupt politician with no support versus somebody who actually has community support?
I'm talking about for the ticket. I'm not talking about for an individual, and I'm not talking about persuasion. I'm talking about GOTV. I'm talking about get out the vote. So I'm trying to turn out an additional voter who is a Democrat. Okay? So I'm not talking, persuasion is like an entirely different lecture, and you don't have enough time, and you wouldn't want to hear me on that. Go ahead. Please interrupt me. I'm better when I'm interrupted.
Okay, you're emphasizing as a Democrat. Is it different for a Republican?
It's a very different world for Republicans. It's a very different world. It's Republican, especially in 2020, you're really better off devoting your attention to screwing up the electoral mechanism than getting more people to vote. You're just not going to like the result of more people voting. So there's a little bit of GOTV for Republicans, but very little. And I can talk about why that is, but the reason is that all sorts of things are synergistic, and that people who don't have anything, and people alienated from the society, and people who aren't like plugged in tend to be Democrats, especially in this world. So let's leave the Republicans out of this. That's an interesting, if this were like a 9-part series and I was going to be back here for 2 or 3 months,
It could be.
I would dedicate one of those to Republicans, or you know, the BJP in India or something. Okay, go ahead.
Well, you know, I just may be very naive, but receiving a postcard
Yeah.
has never convinced me to vote one way or another.
No, we're not talking about convincing you how to vote, but whether to vote.
Well, no, the thing is, I think it's rather naive to think we need to develop some sort of psychology to motivate people to want to change. If
Yes.
they're not voting, then to change.
Yes, that's good, and I'm going to pick up and run on that to show you how wrong you are, and then to agree with you right. Okay? So in 2006, we did a piece of work. I and 2 professors at Yale University, Alan Gerber and Donald Green, did a wonderful piece of research which got tremendous headlines and upset every county and city and township clerk in this state and made them all crazy for about a week. Asking something.
I wasn't crazy. There were people who were crazy.
Who were crazy.
Well,
Well,
the secretary said.
exactly, and kept trying to find some law I'd broken. So we sent out 80,000 pieces of mail. They weren't exactly postcards, but they were simple flyers. And among other things, they said different things, but 20,000 of them said, "Dear Jim, we noticed that you have not," I'm getting royalties missing. Gerber and Green, academic work on get out the vote research. So, "Dear Jim, we noticed that you didn't vote in the most recent August primary," or whatever. "And here's a list of all the people in your block, the 15 of you, and you notice your voter record that you didn't vote, and we've mailed this to the other 15 people in your block, and you know, we hope to see you at the polls next month, and we're going to mail this out again." Okay? Now, you may think that that won't have any impact on people's turnout, but you would be wrong, okay? It now had impact on their turnout. It had I don't know how many complaints we would have received. We had an answering machine on the line, and we couldn't empty it fast enough to keep it below the full level. So we emptied as fast as we could, and we got 1,100 angry calls off it. And I don't know how many more we would have got if we'd emptied it fast enough. But they seem to have made several thousand, maybe 10,000 angry calls to city and township and village and county clerks and Secretary of State and Attorney General. They actually called Yale University, I don't know who did this, and managed to harass the profs at Yale so much that they made me remake the invoice to pretend that they hadn't been involved in writing the thing. Okay, that's how angry this crowd was. But it dramatically increased the turnout. Lordy, and so it's become the gold standard for get out the vote techniques, right? And I can talk about why it worked. It's become a field called social pressure, and that's the one that is used over and over again now by campaigns, Democrat primarily. And honest to God, they copy word for word the research instrument we wrote for the 2006 August primary. It's completely inappropriate for all these other campaigns, but because it's research, they just, you know, so it shows up in my mailbox, I think. Okay, so I mean, if I get it, then so are 100 million other people, right? Or 50 million other people. And you've gotten it too. So, okay, so the point is, it is possible in some conditions for a single postcard or a single letter to cause people to vote. And there are reasons that my piece was aimed at a particular group of people, which is not the group of people we're talking about in 2020, the general election. In the primary we were talking about, we were dealing with a phenomenon that about 10% of the public, this is the sort of thing that Gerber and Green and I and 50 other people have looked into, about 10% of the public says that they vote, but they don't. And they have learned to pretend to be voters. They are knowledgeable about politics. They talk politics as if they are voters. They know when election day is, they know where their precinct is, and they talk about having voted, okay? And so if you do a survey and ask people, did you vote, like the Bureau of Labor Statistics does in every November after the survey that results in the unemployment statistics in the United States, the current population survey. After each election, that survey includes questions about whether they voted or not. That number is always 10% higher than the actual turnout, because a week or 2 weeks after a general election, 10% of the public is already lying about having voted, right? It's not that their memories are bad. It is a reflexive action. It appears, I don't want to be too, I don't want to get caught being politically incorrect here. Let's say that these people tend to be passive individuals. They tend to be people who, because they watch a lot of athletics on TV, they think of themselves as being involved in sports. One of the statistics I saw was that people who lie about having voted watch an average of 6 hours of television a day. It's a slightly different class of people, a different definition. But you have a sense of a very plump person who really ought to vote by absentee ballot, okay? But who just doesn't get to the polls and has learned to basically cover that gap. Go ahead.
I'm old enough to remember this because I voted in the Nixon election. And somebody did a survey after the election, and everybody claimed that they never voted for Nixon. The numbers that claim they didn't. So you can see how those things don't mean anything at that point.
But it turns out they do mean something, because we see it even right after the election, because we have a group of people who practiced in lying about it. And this isn't people whose memories are bad. These are people for whom it is a routine action. So if you expose them by telling their neighbors that they don't actually vote, you tend to make them berserk. Okay, that's what we learned. Okay.
But how many people are getting turned off by excessive advertising?
Well, there would be like a scientific question, and we can tell you that you send out 80,000 letters like we did, and we probably turned out, I have to do the math here, we probably created 5,000 additional votes by sending out 80,000 flyers to just a random assortment of likely voters in Michigan. So if those flyers cost 50 cents a piece to print and mail, which is probably about right, then we spent $40,000 and we got 8,000 additional votes, or 5,000 additional votes, so it cost about $8 a piece. Okay? So that would be what we call low-hanging fruit. But now my next talk is about low-hanging fruit. Okay? So everybody talks about get out the vote in terms of low-hanging fruit, about these methods of doing this that you can get all these people to vote so easily, like using my postcard. But I want, here's a mental image for you. There's an army in retreat, and the soldiers are told, well, we don't have any food for you, but you can forage on the way. You're going through a countryside of orchards and so forth. Pick fruit on the way through. You'll have to forage, but you can do it. And so somebody who's in the middle of this army gets there, and the low-hanging fruit is gone. All the fruit is gone. In fact, the trees have been cut down and burned by the earlier troops. And in fact, the stumps are gone because yesterday's troops dug them up to burn those for campfires. And in fact, you can't really tell where the orchard was anymore. And that's the countryside in which you're told, go pick fruit, okay? The world in 2020, November, there's going to be no low-hanging fruit. There's going to be absolutely nobody for you to remind it's election day. This stuff about, which by the way has never been proven to be useful. Oh, I'm just calling to remind you it's election day. Excuse me. You think that in any general election, but especially in the 2020 general election, there are going to be people out there you know, who are remotely intact, who don't know it's election day. I wanted to do surveys, like, I want to like stop on interstate shoulders and talk on the on-ramps and talk to the guys with the cardboard signs. And I'll bet you they all have strong views about politics now. I wanted to like do surveys of adults in foster care with IQs, say, between 20 and 40. And I'll bet you they may not be able to dress themselves, but most of them have views about politics. And if we had hermits here in mountains, but I don't think we do, but if we had them, I would like to go and talk to them. I would like to talk to Alzheimer's patients, right? And I'll bet you your average Alzheimer's patient, if they still remember the name of their wife, they probably also plan to vote, and they have an opinion in this election. There's nobody out there that you are going to get to vote by reminding them to vote, okay? And so this kind of gets into the point of my talk, which I've now wasted half my time already, most of my time. But now I want to talk to you about what actually can be done in 2020. There ain't no low-hanging fruit. You should be thinking about $1,000 worth of effort per additional vote. And if you can see a vote out there that you can turn out for something like $1,000 in effort, that's not a bad investment. The Democratic Party or the Washington Democratic Party or any progressive organization or you personally, if you see a vote out there that you can turn out for something like $1,000, 100 hours of your time, it seems like it can't possibly be the right investment, but it is, okay? And so I will give you some examples of actual marginal votes. First, one that I suggested that Larry put in my Wikipedia article and as like a criticism of me, I guess like a veiled criticism, because I suggested years ago that we should be thinking in places like Michigan about inmates in jails. And awaiting trial, or on civil commitments, or like 5 other things. But not sentenced on crimes, because in Michigan they can't. Although we have to see how Proposal 3 affects it. That might change that. Good. Okay, but we'll put that aside. But the point is, there are right now in the Washtenaw County Jail 200 or 300 people who are not very good at filling out forms. I'll just tell you, people in jail, the one thing you can say about them is they're just not good at filling out forms correctly. They're just not, okay? Or showing up at the right time. But the point is, so somewhere there are probably 20 or 50 people who might vote with enough effort. And I made that proposal, and Larry sort of ridiculed it, and the next thing I know, Washtenaw sort of had such a program this last time, right?
Yeah.
And how many people did you actually get to vote?
I don't know.
Should do research. Whenever you do these things, you should have some instrumentation. The organization should build instrumentation to see how many people actually turned out with each of these techniques, and you should have control groups too, so you can actually see whether things were successful or not. And then the guys at Yale will be happy to talk to you, and you can become a footnote. I am 4 pages. I am more than a footnote. Okay, so people in jail. That's one extreme case. Family members who are disabled, disordered, transient, unrooted, not very interested in politics are a very good thing to do. Everybody has a nephew, a mother, a next door neighbor, an ex-boyfriend who would vote for the right side if they voted, but there's just no realistic chance that they'll vote. But if you take proper steps, they will vote, at least some of them, right? And they would be, each person, if everybody chooses 1 or 2 such people and get them to vote, that would be very impressive. You'd be turning out a lot of votes. And those are things like, just to give you a thumbnail sketch of one, somebody's going to school out of state. She's in California attending, she's a freshman in college. She's never voted in her life because she just turned 18. she kind of vaguely thinks mom is going to send her an absentee ballot. But mom is not going to send her an absentee ballot because mom can't get an absentee ballot without a signature from her on an absentee ballot application. What mom can get her is an absentee ballot application, which she'd better sign and mail back right away so that it can be the clerk mailed and all this other crapola. It turns out that college students have unbelievably bad voter participation if they depend on absentee ballots. It's on the order. I'm talking about, I've looked at students who are registered to vote in Oakland County to Democratic families where they are attending school at MSU. It looks as if the turnout is less than 10% in a gubernatorial election and less than 20% in a presidential. Well, those are pretty easy cases. If somebody lives in West Bloomfield and their parents are political, just going through the steps of getting them the application, getting it back, letting them know that you're watching them and helping them to vote, getting them information, getting the ballot back, you can create a vote. Go ahead.
I thought that they had, now maybe they've changed this, that the first time that a person voted, they had to vote in their home district.
That's only true if their registration was taken at a drive. It is not true if their registration was taken by the Secretary of State. And so if you're registered to vote back home, almost certainly it was done in association with a driver's license. But you're right, there can be technicalities that come up, and that's the sort of thing that makes this all the more difficult because you've got to follow all the steps.
That's not true. If you have, even if it's with your driver's license, like in Ann Arbor, unless you go in person to get your absentee ballot, you cannot vote in Ann Arbor.
No.
Proposition 3 changed a lot of things.
We did change that. And all of the intricacies of that have not been completely worked out. But the must vote in person thing has been done away with.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Yeah. But there will still be little trips on it.
But that would account for the numbers historically, because it was really, really difficult for college kids to vote, because typically they turned to 18 after their first presidential election, unless they voted for some local election. They were in fact at college during their first presidential election.
But even the ones that were at college, we weren't getting them to register there. Trust me, there are many opportunities by making sure that at each step we don't lose them. There were many different ways to get those people to actually get ballots and get the ballots back. 30% of all ballots mailed to students who have never voted before, 30% of ballots mailed to them are not returned to be counted. Just awful. But the point is, that is a very useful activity, even though it sounds like it's extremely specific. I'm sorry, I missed a hand there. No? Okay. So people who are, I already said, mom away in supported living, let's say, or a child who is mentally disturbed, people who have, there are just all sorts of people around us who are not part of a political world, but who are 18, who are sort of politically oriented, but who are just not effective enough to register and vote. But we can look around us, find those, and that can be, for each person, our own little project. If everybody took on one of those people, the number of additional votes would be greater than what we're going to produce out of sending people off after low-hanging fruit, because there's no low-hanging fruit, and there's a lot of these cases, okay? Okay, so I can talk about other such classes of people, but you get the general idea that what we ought to be doing is we ought to be thinking about, back to my army, if you're talking about an army in the field in those conditions, you ought to be thinking about fruit that is normally considered inedible, or how to deal with fruit that is spoiled and salvaging part of it, right? Or fruit that's way out of the way and has to be collected. But in each case, what we need is to think about widening our, surrounded. Widening.
I'm big, but I'm not that big. I mean, surrounded. But
so basically not looking for the easy things, but looking for things that are difficult and that require preparation, organization, planning, and application of some resources.
If you want to make any other comments now, otherwise I'm going to ask you some questions.
Okay.
I want to join this conversation.
Okay, you do that.
Okay. If I understood your numbers, it'd be more expensive today, that the example you gave of using, wasn't peer pressure, but something akin to that, was you spent $40,000, you got 5,000 additional votes. Well, at the $1,000 vote method of using, you say, which is a pretty good deal these days, you get 40 votes, not 5,000. Which leads me to the question of, I'm going to ask the group, do you think it's ever, I'd like to see a show of hands, is it ever acceptable to repeat Mark's experiment with the Yale professors of saying, we know you didn't vote, we're going to tell your neighbors. Raise your hands if you think that's ever an acceptable thing to do. Okay, wait, about 30, 40%?
But you didn't ask the no's, you have to ask the no's.
Okay, how many of you think it is not acceptable? Okay.
See, it's about the same.
I think a little more yeses.
The thing is also that now people are used to it. And like, I've seen people getting these things and they're not necessarily accurate because they don't have to be. And so I saw someone I know got one of these and it said, you didn't vote in the last presidential election. And she said, I certainly did vote. But this was, the thing is, there's no requirement that it tell the truth. So it's,
and Larry, you will confirm, this is totally legal, this information is public, right?
Information is public, yes.
Okay?
It needs to be public because otherwise how can you campaign to, like for example, primary voters are only 10% or so of the voters, and you want to know who the primary voters are, you can send mailings to them, and instead of spending 10 times as much money sending to everybody. So yeah, so voter records have got to be public.
Yeah, you got a couple.
So the interesting thing about this is based on the work of Robert Cialdini. He's a social psychologist. And he proved you don't even have to name the person. You could put a card in a hotel room and said, the people of this hotel room typically recycle their, they do not save their towels. And that showed a big bump in people that said, don't change my towels every single day. So applying this technique and saying, 50% of the people on your street vote. Do you want to be part of that group?
That's true, but the problem is you only get about a quarter of the impact. If you want to really hit them on the head, you got to hit them on the head. And I was going to tell you, like, the technique we use can be, I'm trying to set up research to do better cases of it. But let me tell you two examples of how it could be improved and tested, which I've not found the funding to do this. One of them is to have a voter roll, like a voter honor roll, and thank all the people on this block or in this street or in this precinct who voted, right? And publish their names without their permission. And so the people whose names aren't published, they could appear on the list without the gold star next to them, right? We wouldn't say they didn't vote, they just didn't get a gold star. I've actually thought about mass producing lawn signs and running them out so each block gets a lawn sign with, say, 20 names on it. And it has the names of the people who voted, right? And just saying, thank you. The Michigan Voter Project thanks 15 names for voting in last November's election. And let's see what kind of impact that has on turnout. It's not exactly shaming the people who aren't on it, but the people who aren't on it are going to know they're not on it. And even if the lawn sign only stays up a day, because I didn't get permission to put it up, I just ran out in the middle of the night and stuck it in with my paid people. Even if it only disappears after a day, they're going to be thinking, my name should be on there.
Someone's going to take a picture and put it on social media. It'll be there forever.
Yeah.
Okay. Dirk?
No. What if you just threaten to do it?
Well, you've got to get people's attention. And the best way to do it is to really let them see it so they think, this is how voting works. Let me make a point. I want to talk about history here for just a second. Until 1860, voting was extremely public.
1888.
Okay.
1888.
But I'm talking about before the beginning of the secret ballot. You're talking about when the ballot is actually printed.
It wasn't a secret ballot until the ballot was printed.
Okay. But so in that period, voting was done in public out loud, everybody knew who you voted for, and you voted typically in a hall, in a bar, in front of all of your neighbors who were jeering and cheering. And so voting or not voting was extremely public, and that's the reason the turnout was essentially 100% for the handful of people who are actually eligible to vote.
I want to complete my little poll. So I asked the question is whether people thought it was appropriate to use. Is it appropriate to use one time, and that is in the 2020 presidential election? How many? So you might not like it as a general practice, but is a situation so important that in 2020, would you think that that'd be an appropriate thing to do? Please raise your hands if it's yes. And who thinks no? Okay. So,
there are variations of it that I would say I would raise my hand for yes for, and variations I think I was.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
I'm saying that we've discussed several variations here, and there are variations for which my answer would be yes, and some others that I think might.
Could you give us an example of one that you would and one that you wouldn't?
Okay. The one I especially don't like is the first example. You know, we know you didn't vote. Here's who voted and here's who did not. I think in some very long-term way that the pushback against any party who initiated that I think it would be pretty intense.
Yeah, what if it didn't come from a party?
Right.
It would be seen as coming from a party because it would be public knowledge ultimately who. Okay, are you talking about mailing these to every single person, including the Republicans, so that you're getting out the Republican vote?
I wouldn't see any sense to that.
Well, I wouldn't either. So then it will be known on behalf of which party it was done. And
I think there were a lot of groups who got involved in the last election who were not considered to be agents or associated with the Democratic Party, yet were very active in the campaign, in a partisan way. But you might be right. You might be right.
Do you expect a different answer if you asked, would you personally engage in any of these techniques? Or do you think it's
I prefer to be a lover, not a fighter, okay? So it makes me unbelievably uncomfortable to have my phone be ringing off the hook that much. On the other hand, speaking personally, I think Trump being elected a second time would be a disaster for my family, my grandchildren, and for America. So something I would have to wrestle with.
I guess my following up what Carolyn was talking about, my concern is that part of the success of Donald Trump's campaign is in reaction to nanny state. And so I see that kind of behavior of publishing people who don't vote along that line for people who have that approach to government.
Okay. Bob, I don't think you've asked a question yet.
Is it legal for the Arbor News, for example, after election, or to publish the names of all the people who voted?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they could say 2 weeks before that, we are going to publish the names of all the people who voted.
Yeah.
Would that be effective?
Somewhat. That's been tested.
Why should I encourage somebody to vote if I don't know what party he belongs?
Excellent question. How do someone identify what party somebody would support?
Well, the answer is linear models. We know the precinct in which you live, and so we know from that a little bit about the likely partisanship of the people. We know your gender, age, marital status, so we can guess from that some of your partisanship. We know whether you voted in the 1992, 2008, 2012, or 2006 presidential primaries. And if you did, we know which party you voted in. We know which petitions you've signed, and that tells us a little bit about it. We know which nominating petitions for Bill Schuette or Jennifer Granholm or any other candidate, because we've keyed 10 million signatures on nominating petitions. We've keyed 20 million signatures off initiative petitions. And if we don't know about you, then we can infer your partisanship by considering your other housemates and relatives and people with whom you have lived. And from all of that put together, we have a logistic regression model predicting your likely vote, which isn't perfect, but is so good that everybody considers it to be the gold standard in the industry. So we're not too worried that we're making a lot of mistakes when we turn out voters.
The New York Times, let's see if I have the quote somewhere, I may not. Oh, the New York Times once said about Mark and his company, the best list possible in this competitive state. So that's Mark's business.
That was exactly my question. The list, that is the extent to which I would say the campaigns I participated in were somewhat formalistic. On the one hand, we had a lot of things which did reach a lot of people. And we noticed with the Bernie campaign, for example, when he got the Michigan primary, that even though we're going out to neighborhoods and we're knocking on doors and we have the usual not home rate, meaning you're really spending an afternoon and you're not seeing that many people, but every place we've been, the vote was there. So it was sort of like this magic kind of thing. But we were continually frustrated in every campaign I've been part of since, of course, the Clinton campaign, all of that. The lists are just don't seem to correspond. So if you have such good lists,
they
why
weren't
doesn't the
my
van?
lists used by Bernie.
Okay, so why can't the van have this kind of list?
Come on, that's a softball.
The reason the van doesn't have my list is because the Michigan Democratic Party hasn't reached an agreement yet to accept them. And I was just over at Hart Kennedy House, and the offer I made was that we would give them the lists for free if they would put them into the van. And that turned out to be a heavy lift for them, and they're still working on the
We have
internals.
volunteers who can do it.
No, it's not a problem. No, it's a problem of
So what's the problem?
the Voter Activation Network is the official list of the Democratic National Committee or the state party. Or it's actually the presentation that you see. The underlying file has a different name, but the file that is available through the Michigan Democratic Party is a different list compiled by people from out of state who are sure that Michigan is very much like all the other states that start with M, like Missouri and Mississippi and Montana and Maine, and that the differences really are trivial, and that they know how to do it, and that they don't need my help.
So what are the odds they're going to accept your list?
Who was it? Politics.
Okay, we're running out of time, and there's a couple more points I want to raise in a little discussion on it, but yes, two more questions.
Okay. Last year, I have been involved that much this year, but last year I was involved with the Michigan Resistance Group, and we were calling people on various issues, and I was hoping that stuff would refine some of the list, because, out of 15 calls you maybe reach two or three people. And in my experience with doing some of this stuff, the lists are pretty bad. So does that stuff get refined? Because when the people who were in the offices that were running this stuff tend to be really newbies who didn't know, they got people moving and doing stuff, but the effectiveness was
Short answer. The answer is to Michigan Resistance. I don't think had long-term staff, and I don't think it.
Okay.
But I'm just saying that it's not part of an institution that'll go on forever unless somebody salvages it. But you see, it has to be.
Yeah. So I don't want to interrupt, but yeah. So that's my group, Michigan Resistance. Hey, how's it going? Thanks for coming. Yeah. So I founded Michigan Resistance. We are actually long-term. We're having a calling party tomorrow and on Tuesday like we do every week. Yeah, we might see him there. Yes, we did use that data and we updated the van.
Good.
But it's still the van.
You're still
What?
volunteers.
Yeah.
Oh, we're all volunteers though.
100% volunteers.
And I want to put in a plug for the PEG newsletter. So make sure you get the PEG newsletter because we always put in the resistance.
I actually really appreciate that. I see everything.
Not at all.
Is there any actual research on which, if any, of these techniques work? I mean, I know, no, wait a minute. You hear, oh, well, if the candidate knocks on your door, that works, and postcards don't work, and this works. And what about real research?
Well, that's what this is. Gerber and Green at that time taught at Yale, and they have like 5 people who work with them pretty closely. And this is actually just a complete compendium of all the serious scientific research, controlled experiments. So my 80,000 postcards, you understand, there was also a very substantial control group. And so this was not some nonsense. This was statistically modeled, carefully controlled, and then I got to run it, so it was less controlled than it should have been. But it was very clear what the impact was.
So this is not about persuasion, is the other point.
Right, that's also true. Yes. But
In
as far as,
the book, they go through each one of these techniques: robocalling, personal calling, canvassing, whatever. This is an example. This is one of the appendices in it, and this is a list of all the direct mail campaign experiments that were done. So if you're really interested in where the data comes from behind what Mark's talking about, it's a great book. It's not expensive either.
yeah, it's in its third edition. I think he's playing a 4th edition in the next year. Everybody wants to ask you.
Yeah, well, we got the pot stirred. Vicki, do you know? Does anybody know? We have to be out here at
4:30.
Oh, we have to 4:30.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Or was it 4:15?
4:30.
Okay, great. Because we got a lot of interesting conversation going. I still want to. Okay, I'm going to call on those of you who haven't spoken yet, and hopefully we'll have enough time for deep questions. Michael.
Yes, the Ann Arbor Observer, as you may know, in September they have this large edition where they talk about the various neighborhoods, average cost of homes and this sort of thing. I was talking to John Hilton, the editor, about this last week. I said, would it be possible to put the percentage of people who voted in each of those areas? He thought that might be possible, but since then I'm thinking it might make more sense if we had street captains. If I see I'm Fredon Road, and 2 or 3 of my neighbors, we go to all the houses. We would like to win the prize, as it were, for having the highest percentage of people who vote on this street. Will you do this? We'll put your name on the sign that we put up in our front lawns.
Does anybody know the average turnout in Ann Arbor for a presidential election?
I want to answer that.
There's a lot of
The turnout percentages are a garbage statistic, okay? If you take people who actually are living there on election day and know they're registered to vote, and who then fail to vote in a very high turnout presidential election like we're going to see in 2020, essentially there are no such people except people who are very ill, okay? There just are no non-voters. If you're talking about the non-voters on the rolls, where you divide the number of, people divide the number of voters by the number of registered voters on the list, but the list includes probably 1.8 million people who don't live here, okay? And in a place like Ann Arbor, if you look in the dorms, you'll see 30-year-olds in the dorms registered to vote, and you know something? They don't vote because they have moved to other states long ago, but they remain on the rolls until the fullness of time shall remove them from the list. So the truth is, in 2020, we're going to have an extraordinary turnout. We've never had a turnout much above 5 million in this state, and we're going to have at least 6 million votes statewide in a state with only about 7.6 million eligible adults. And it will not surprise me if it's above 6.
I'll try and get back to the rest, but there's one other thing I want us to be addressing. First of all, I do want to thank all of you for being here, because I know that a lot of you I virtually begged to come to this because I knew it was going to be an extraordinary event and an opportunity to really get down on some important issues. And PEG, the sponsoring organization here, has a mission of seeing that everybody is treated with equality and acceptance. And we learned that The only way that was going to happen is if we elect people who share our values. And we feel that it is not too early to be doing the work to run some experiments in the local elections in 2019 if we can, and to start building our databases and our networks. It's not too early. So, but I want to throw one thing out. Met with Larry last week, and Larry said that when Ohio went to no reason absentee ballots, the percentage of people voting absentee ballots by absentee ballot doubled. And of course, Michigan, this will be the first election where you can vote absentee ballot without having to give a reason. And I'm going to start by asking Mark. Mark, what opportunities do you think that might present?
Before he answers.
Yes.
Chuck was going to have me do this at the end, but I'm going to try a new way of raising money for us. We're going to pass the jar. And this is all done by volunteers, and Chuck, other people can fund it, but we do need some money to keep us going. So instead, we're going to pass the jar.
And you can write a check, and on the back of the jar it tells you who to write it to.
We need to write a check.
Chuck, it's 4:30, and we have time.
Okay, good.
The time is 4:30.
Thank you.
Okay, and the question was what? I'm sorry.
What opportunities does...
No reason absentee voting. There are two different kinds of elections. If we're talking about the 2020 presidential election, I think people ought to be pitching the idea to the public. You want to vote by absentee ballot because there's going to be a tremendous turnout and there's going to be a mess at the polls and God only knows, and you want to just cast your ballot and get off the list. And once the best pitch to sell it to people, if you vote, the mail will stop coming and people will stop calling you because the list will get updated and you will be off the hook. You'll be freed. It's like you've gone to heaven, right? You'll be in the after-election world.
Does that happen in legislature?
Larry, does the turnout actually go up, or do the voters just shift to using it?
Hard to tell.
That's a good question. I don't know. But it did certainly in Ohio, and of course they're starting from a lower base than what we have now.
Yeah.
The proportion of people voting absentee did double.
Yeah. We already have about 25% of our total vote in a typical election being absentee. And so I can't believe it's going to get to 50 in the first election. But it might, because of this pitch that if you vote, so in Oregon and Washington, which vote entirely by mail, everybody has learned that you want to vote as soon as possible because it means that the pain stops, see? And that the parties only have the non-voters left on election day. So the handful of people who have failed to vote are the ones who get all of the attention of all of the volunteers. And so there's tremendous pressure to vote. For other elections, voting absentee dramatically increases the turnout, the actual turnout, because once you get pulled into the system, you request an absentee ballot. The crucial thing, by the way, is not to just request an absentee ballot. It's to get on the Ann Arbor city list, or the municipal list of people to whom applications are routinely mailed. There is such a list for almost all municipalities. If you get somebody to sign up for that, they receive an application. All they have to do is sign it and mail it back, and then comes a ballot. Once you have a ballot, see, the psychology is completely different. It's not a question of going to the polls, remembering to do it, and finding time in your day. It's a question of, they've sent me this ballot, and now I'm supposed to fill out and send it back, and I have a month to do it. So the turnout rises because you're kind of pulled into this paperwork process. If you remember the old Book of the Month Club, it was kind of like that. You kind of like get dragged into it against your will. So the turnout rate in city elections, in August primaries and so forth, rises dramatically once people begin voting by absentee ballot. And you can see that it's actually a causal effect. It rises because they are involved in a different process than they were. As far as the increase in the 2020 general election, I doubt that it'll be very much, but it would be nice to get these people out of the list of potential voters and into the list of have already voted, so we can just yell at the remaining million.
Okay, now, Michelle.
Yeah, just commenting on that
poses a challenge to campaigns, especially in primaries, but I think also in the general in 2020. Those people who are not on the permanent absentee list, who are going to vote early, you need to do a lot of outreach to them sooner to get them to vote the way you want to. So figuring all that out is an issue. Again, especially for primaries, but I think in 2020 it will apply as well. And I'd like your thoughts. You're going to disagree.
Well, here's the thing. If we're talking about 2020, how many independents are left in Michigan? Almost none. There's almost nobody who splits their ticket. And the people who split their ticket and care which, you know, who's, what they say, who's running for
They're still judges and proposals.
That's right. But if we're talking about partisan offices, you know, at this point, over 90% of all vote is cast in Michigan by party. It's the number of independents has dropped by at least half in the last 10 years. So sure, those people are out there, and yes, those people got their own problems. But trust me, there are lots of people that just stuffing them into one end of the sausage maker, they come out the other.
Yeah, I agree, but it could be a very close election, and I think Larry's point about the initiatives and nonpartisans is well taken.
I'm for doing all of it.
We have a little study group going that is looking at what we can do to be most effective in 2020 as local activists. And if you'd like to get notifications of the meetings where we're debating this, sign up. I'm going to send around a sheet, and if you could pass it along to your neighbor, we'll get back in touch with you. And also, of course, give us an email address, please.
Just playing off of what this gentleman was saying, what about, would it be an effective strategy to have people going to their neighbors with the information about getting on that list, the absentees? Updating people, I mean, that's a non-threatening, non-campaigning way to get everybody mobilized.
Well, if we're talking about the 2020 general election, the only effect we're going to really have is to get people to vote absentee instead of in person.
Right. But
Okay.
that's your first way of, that's how you contact your people and you know who's
Right.
going to vote, too.
But that's all fine. You should understand that your neighbors are as berserk as you are about this whole thing.
They're not. I am amazed how many people I talk to who are unaware. I mean, there are a lot of people who are
Those are your neighbors, the people who literally live next door to you?
And the people I work with, I go as a substitute teacher in the school.
Then you clearly live in the wrong neighborhood.
Right, so you go back to the ghetto.
Stay there, otherwise your typical Ann Arbor homeowner.
They're going to vote, but they're not aware.
Your typical Ann Arbor homeowner is already so politicized that there is not any room to increase their politicization, okay? Now, if you're talking about your co-workers or people you run into at the store or people who your kids know or something, that's possible. But your average Ann Arbor homeowner is already as deeply committed. They're just at a different meeting tonight than you are.
And the renters?
Oh, renters are very different.
I'd be interested in your review or comments. We spent a lot of time and money putting out a voter's guide. And I think it was influential in who people voted for, especially in the Supreme Court and those type of elections. That versus what you're talking about now with the voter's guide. Hey, what's your thoughts on a good move, or are there other things that we should be doing?
In the first place, you should do what you want to do because that's what you want to do, and it's going to be easier for you to do the things you want to do than the things that you're advised to do that would work better than aren't as much fun. In the second place, I would strongly advise that when you do the voter guide this time, that you deliberately select, using people who've got like a research background, a bunch of control precincts and not mail to those, so you can actually see the impact by precinct across the state. You can't mail to everybody anyway, so if you pull out 1,000 or 2,000 precincts that are randomly selected, you either will or will not see an impact of your mailing. It would not surprise me if you were able to persuade Democrats to vote for the Democratic preferred candidates for nonpartisan offices on the ballot that were nonpartisan. Something certainly got people to vote for, who was the one? Kavanaugh. Because I did polling that showed her losing, and I told her, you know, my polling was completed by about October 10th, but a month before the election, you know, I told everybody she's going to lose. So, so someone got her to win, and maybe it was your mailing.
Yeah, because we were so damn late, we missed the absentee ballot opportunity, and we did some survey data that showed that yes, people really did use it for the nonpartisan offices, and we also
controlled experiments.
Yeah, well, but it wasn't close. I mean, it was overwhelming. And the other thing we looked at was the precincts where we looked at precincts and saw the percentage who voted for Kavanaugh in precinct and the percentage who voted absentee. And again, this is not perfect, but many, many more voted for Kavanaugh as a percentage in precinct than did the absentee who did not get the voter guide.
Yeah, then Sam would have had a lift also.
There was a tiny lift. Yeah, yeah.
So something else is going on.
Yeah. It is time? Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to go back to prep and planning. This past election, I tried to focus on getting out the vote in the elder business community, meaning those who live in adult foster homes, assisted living, all of that. I couldn't crack into that, take it offline. If anybody knows how we can reach into that network because of the issues of perhaps taking advantage of someone, if you could influence them in a household of 6, I'd like that because I think that comes into the planning and preparation.
Yeah, why don't you identify yourself? So
Rita Turner Sheeran, and I worked on Voters Not Politicians.
And when I started, nobody's really picked up on what I said before about the idea that the real votes you should be looking for are difficult, and those would be difficult votes and they're worth doing. And really building a database of all those facilities, who owns them, who runs them, who manages them, if they have policies, who they're affiliated with, and all that stuff. It's all difficult. A lot can be done there, but it will be one vote at a time. And that is exactly the sort of difficult work that is going to actually be useful. In a turnout of 6 million, trust me, all the people who are going to be mailed postcards to turn them out, and they already, you know, that effect is already completely swamped by the effect of the election and the general berserkness of the electorate.
Okay.
What you were talking about people are politicized and informed, that really only seems to apply at the presidential election. I've noticed here in Ann Arbor where we have no daily newspaper. We're the largest city without a daily newspaper. We have no local, really, radio news or local news for television. And I find that in this town, people are experts and educated on certain subjects, but they don't know who their city council members are. They have no idea of local politics and the issues.
Yeah.
That's what I find out.
Okay, did anybody not ask a question who wants to ask an additional question? Yes.
This is slightly off topic, but this last election, I was writing letters for an organization through Move On saying vote forward. Mm-hmm. And we had a template, and we would write, say, dear, and I dear Miss Bannett, I vote in every election, and here's the reason why. And then I would write in why why I voted. I would sign my name, not my full name, and then hand address the envelope, and they told us to use a colorful stamp. And then the return address, in case the envelopes didn't go there, was not my address, but a vote forward address. And I was writing letters to Stacey Abrams and all over, because what they would do is they would buy these lists of voters who are likely Democratic who have not voted recently. And they tell us in a little feedback that we received that they think it turned out the vote by a couple of percentage points. Do you know anything about that?
It's the sort of thing that Gerber and Green compile in their book and tally, and they do a very good job of refereeing the quality of the control group and the statistical methods used. I'm not particularly familiar with that, but if there's research done on it, it wouldn't surprise me if you could get a couple % out of that.
Yeah, well, They said they were still analyzing the results, the last thing I heard.
The problem is that in 2020, the knob is not going to be 11, to quote Spinal Tap, it's going to be about 17. We already saw that. Gubernatorial turnout in this state is typically 2.8 million or 3 million, the election we just held. So Chris Thomas, the director of elections, said 4 million. And so I was on the radio and I was called and I was asked, so how many you think, Mr. Grebner? I said, I'm going to top Chris Thomas. I'm going to go crazy. I'm going to say 4.2 million votes.
And then he said the same thing. I'm going to top Grebner, and he came up with.
I didn't know that.
So who was right?
Well, it turned out it was 4.3 million. I don't know how high he finally went, but it was an amazing number of votes. And that's not even an election with Donald Trump on the ballot. 1 million people turned out because they're so crazy about Donald Trump that they voted anyway. Trust me, there's going to be craziness by the time. This is 18 months before an election, and there are already 45 of you here talking about how you're going to work in this election. This is going to be insane.
So you counted the room too?
Yeah.
Little secret what goes on up here. We are going to have to wind this up.
I'm going to be out in the parking lot, so.
Okay, I think we can. I think if you go to the lobby, that's fine.
Okay.
I think. So we really need to thank Mark for the provocative presentation that we knew he was going to give. And what do you think we bring him back before the election? All right.
Seriously.